In India, every day 40 girls under the ages of 15 are exploited and forced into prostitution. In today's video, the problems of child labor, and more specifically child labor in the prostitution industry in India, will be discussed. Understanding the current situation of child prostitution with direct relation to the classical and contemporary theoretical perspectives of the world of works, and taking a closer look to the viewpoints of Karl Marx Weber in relation to alienation, exploitation, and class. Child labor began in the United States during the late 70s and early 80s when the Industrial Revolution began. Many families had to find somewhere to work or they couldn't survive. Child labor can be described as employment of children in an industry or business, especially when illegal or considered exploitative, according to the International Labor Standards, whereas the U.S. Department of the Social Justice defines child prostitution as a term for children working as prostitutes who get paid to have sex. In most cases, it is not the child who makes money from prostituting, but a pimp, which is a person who makes money from other people prostituting for him, or someone who directly abuses a child. Child prostitution concerns one of the biggest problems within child labor, especially in developing countries such as India, where approximately 300,000 to 500,000 children are forced into prostitution for diverse reasons, such as high poverty rates and rising population growth. The first point I would like to discuss in this video is how child prostitution exploits young girls. The child prostitution industry is estimated to generate $400 million annually from 300 girls serving an average of 6 customers per day, according to the Times newspaper, an article published by Ilona Dorkman, who discovered that children only end up earning $300 yearly, which accounts for less than 1% in comparison to the pimp's high rate of turnover, which is between $5,000 to $32,000 per week. According to Oxford's dictionary, exploitation can be defined as the action or fact of treating someone unfairly in order to benefit from their work. The high and rising demand for child labor in the prostitution industry only results to work intensification, where 10.1 million children between the ages of 5 to 14 are said to be working full-time and are bounded to meet a minimum of 6 to 7 customers a day, according to the Ministry of Employment in India. In relation to Marx's theory of exploitation, which explains how the capitalists, in this case the pimps, are exploiting the poor, which are the children in the scenario, Marx would argue that the pimps are exploiting the young girls by forcing them into working for long hours, but also keeping the surplus value in their pockets, instead of distributing the monetary rewards gained by the children in exchange for sex services. The question arises, why are children more vulnerable to exploitation in the prostitution industry? The Child Rights and Youth Organization in India says that 70% of the prostitutes inside the country are of school age. In the greed of cheap laborers, owners employ children so that they can get away with paying them less wages, and they are unlikely to protest against their harsh working conditions, where girls are kept in scrunch-up brothels and are raped until they are broken before they start working full-time shifts in the prostitution industry. 11-year-old Saeed was sold to a pimp by her family, where she expressed in the Guardian article, "They wanted me to obey them, and if I object, they always had the same words for me. We owe you because we bought you. If anyone speaks to you, just smile." Hochschild defined emotional labor as the management of feeling to create a publicly observable facial and bodyable display. Emotional labor is sold for a wage and therefore has an exchange value. The power struggle between the child and a pimp following the circumstances allows the pimp to take advantage of their vulnerability, putting forward harsh managerial styles of management from the beginning, making young girls an easy target for exploitation, benefiting from their work by internally destroying them, and in return expect the girls to smile in agony. The question arises, why do pimps hold such high power of authority? Why are developing countries such as India stuck in poverty cycles? And why are such young girls agreeing to exploitation from a young age? All these questions can be explained using the power theory of a contemporary economist, Max Weber, who explained in his book The Spirit of Capitalism, power tends to corrupt, absolute power corrupts absolute. In this case, children are in the subordinate position who come from low socioeconomical classes, where people from the upper class, pimps in this case, are able to control their access to desired social resources such as food, shelter, and water. The upper class misuse their power by exploiting the young children, making the upper class corrupted people. It morally destroys their nature and fills them with disruptive pride, further encouraging a capitalist society and poverty cycles. The second point I will discuss is child prostitution causes alienation amongst children. When I think about child prostitution, the first question that pops up to my mind is why are parents so vulnerable towards their children that they allow the practice of child labor to exist in its most brutal form? The bitter truth about today's society is that our society can easily give up their child to sex traffickers in the name of tradition and customs, forcing the children into prostitution. In 2012, the Indian government stated that 22% of its population is below its official poverty limit, leaving about 276 million people living below $1 per day, according to the World Poverty Clocks. Poor families sometimes have no choice but to abandon their children, leaving them into the hands of traffickers, where a total of 15 million people, many of them mature children, are forced to work as prostitutes for a no pay. Marx described this as alienation, whereby the worker is made to feel foreign to the product of his or her own labor. In other words, the laborer is expected to perform unwanted means of labor without having a choice, acting as a means of survival. According to the article published in BBC, the pimps would keep the girls like slaves in cages and were only taken out to eat or given to a customer for sex. Following Hochschild's theory of emotional labor, children are broken until they start obeying every single saying of the pimp, having no choice or way to escape from the horrors of prostitution. Lena, a 10-year-old girl in the same article, explained how she had to involve herself in prostitution and drop out of school as having a sense of responsibility towards her family, involving herself in unwanted means of labor. However, in Hugo's perspective, child prostitution is a form of dirty work which is essential in society's existence, where if dirty work is not done, then we all will die out of complications. And if there was no poverty and everyone was rich, who would do the dirty work? Is child prostitution a problem or a solution in society? Because in the end of the day, it still brings an income into families, and someone has to do the dirty work. I would like to end this video by giving a thought to whether child prostitution is a problem or a solution in today's society where poverty levels are growing in alarming rates, leaving families helpless and young children emotionally drenched. I believe it is a crime to exploit such young children from early ages, where instead of being involved in educational learning, they are taught about prostitution in terms of obeying the norms of religion, where they are forced to accept their circumstances. The poverty cycles will continue to evolve in India unless strict rules and regulations are put into place by NGOs and governments protecting the children of tomorrow. Thank you for listening.